What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares to set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. All right. Welcome back, Nightmare Success In and Out listeners. This is where you come for what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? And don't forget to follow, subscribe, like, comment, all that good stuff that helps the show. Wow. I got a great guest here. We were just talking before we got on here. I want to give a shout out first to Tony Gant, who connected Kevin Harris and me, my guest today. I think I wrote it down. Tony Gant was episode 66. He has an unbelievable story, also doing a lot of great things with Nation Outside. But I've got to tell you, Kevin Harris's story is nothing short of just flat out remarkable. He grew up on Detroit's east side in the shadow of criminals and drug rings, so many negative influences. But Kevin looked up to these people as mentors and role models, and it led him to a sentence of 14 years in prison. He didn't lose his faith. His faith is what got him through his nightmare. Didn't lose hope. You know, the old saying goes, it takes a village to raise a child. It took a village to encourage, motivate, and overcome all the obstacles that Kevin had through his reentry to achieve his personal goals, his business goals, where he is now. Kevin is now Pastor Harris at the Nazarene Missionary Baptist Church in Detroit. He even ran for office in 2020 for state rep in Michigan. It's just one of those stories. I was telling him when we got on here, it's like one of those, you know, when you see Rocky 1, Rocky 2, Rocky 3, why do we like these stories? It's the comeback. It's the get back up after you get knocked down, and then you see somebody live through their nightmare and thrive. I can't wait to unpack all this. Before we do, I want to recognize our show sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. You know, who likes spending a couple of weekends walking car lots, looking for a car? Once you find the car, then you spend 4 or 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like a root canal appointment. Well, there's a better way to take away all this pain and hassle getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They are your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you. They'll negotiate your best price. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge. It's the new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Kevin Harris, welcome.
Hey, what's going on, Brent? I appreciate you having me on.
Well, I know you're a busy man and hard to tie down. I'm just happy that you made the time to do this, and I can't tell you how impressed I am with your story and what you've been able to do. I mean, 14 years in prison is a long time, and you know, a lot of people can get lost and institutionalized and lose hope, and that becomes the way they finish out their life, whether they're in or out of prison. And you didn't do that. And I was wondering, you know, when I was reading your intro, coming up on the hard streets of Detroit's east side, can you take us back a little bit, Kevin, growing up in those days, what that was like, what your life was like as a kid in that world?
Yeah, it was, I mean, you know, the younger days when I was growing up, I mean, I'm a 70s kid. I grew up in the 70s and 80s.
Me too.
You know, there's a line that Jay-Z has in one of his songs that says, you know, he had to master Reaganomics, you know. That was the era. But when I was younger, it was pretty cool because, you know, even though my mom was single and we've all heard that story, you don't really know how dire things are because you're just a kid.
Right. You don't know any different
that you need, but coming into my teenage years, it was pretty tough. Detroit was, hands down the murder capital of the United States. In our community, we had already dealt with, alcohol epidemics and heroin epidemics, folks coming back from the war, Vietnam, heroin flooding the streets in those days. But in my time of coming up during that age, it was the crack epidemic. It was the beginning of crack coming to our town, and I happened to, grow up. My family was from a place called Marianna, Arkansas.
Okay.
And there was a notorious, so-called notorious drug organization that came out of Marianna, Arkansas, that took over the drug trade in Detroit, which was the Chamber Brothers. They were from the same hometown that my mother and her family was from. But the bottom line, it was tough. It was tough. We never seen anything like that before. And, just to see a whole community addicted to drugs. Everybody had a mother, a father, a uncle, a sister, a brother who was addicted. A lot of kids grew up, and when you get addicted to drugs and crack like that in those days, folks didn't care about anything. They sold their food stamps. They, any money they got, they stole, they broke it, they did whatever they had to do. And the typical thing, it would be no surprise to go to a friend's house and open the refrigerator, and in the refrigerator is a jar of mayonnaise with a butter knife in it, with nothing in it, maybe a piece of bread. That was, a lot of kids grew up like that.
Yeah.
And when you grow up like that, it can easily get ingrained in your mind. When you come outside, you have to do whatever you need to do
to survive.
Yeah. And it was rough. It definitely was rough.
So when you got into your teens, you talk about the guys that you looked up to and what was going on in the streets. Was it just a natural thing that was just what was going on, and so your friends and that's just how everybody was living?
Yeah, well, and it starts out a little more innocent than that, it starts out that, you, like any neighborhood, you grow up, with a group of friends, little rascals.
Yep.
But then all of a sudden, you might have, one of those friends that disappears for a while, 2-3 weeks, a couple of months. Mm-hmm. And then that one friend shows back up with a wad of money in their pocket and new shoes, and
everything looks great.
And you're like, hey, what happened? How'd you get this money?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
And then they tell you about who they work for. Well, I'm in those days it was called sitting in a spot. Mm-hmm. Because the older guys, they were running these crack houses, and they would use the younger guys, like myself, to sit in what we call sit in the spot.
Yeah. And
we would have to, what they call roll. That was rolling, was making money. Mm-hmm. We would have to roll, 24/7. And if you sold crack for like $10, you could sell it for $12, and you made what they call a $2 top.
Okay.
Off of each rock that you sold for $10. So you got $2. And then at the end of the week, you might have got a salary. But so it was kind of a predatory thing. Mm-hmm. But in the eyes of what people might have looked at and considered as predatory, and being predators towards these kids and young kids, for us it was opportunity.
Right, you were making money.
It was an opportunity. We didn't see it as that we were.
No, you're getting paid a commission to sell something, and the opportunity was there.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's how we came up. And along with that, it came a lot of danger.
Yeah.
You're dealing with a lot of older folks who are strung out on drugs, and they'll do anything to get it. There's been a lot of young people that were killed in those days. So it was pretty bleak.
You probably saw a lot of that because you were right in the middle of it.
Yeah, it was pretty bleak. It was pretty bleak.
So Kevin, when was it? How old would you have been when you had your nightmare hit you, that this was the big deal, that was the one that was, it felt different than anything else you dealt with?
And in terms of being dealing with the police getting
Yeah.
incarcerated,
Yeah.
Unfortunately I was 18, by the time um by the time my classmates were graduating, I was already in prison. Uh,
What
and
was school like for you? What I meant to ask you that, like your school life, what was, were you living two lives? Were you living the street life and going to school and being a kid, but then being kind of in the adult world? Is that kind of what that rolled into?
yeah, absolutely. Ironically, you have the series on Stars right now, BMF,
Yeah.
with Big Meech and Southwest T, and there's episodes in the early episodes where they were showing how they were still going to school,
Yeah.
um, while selling drugs, living at home, and sometimes if the family structure is broke down, it was some pretty challenging situations that I was growing up with. But yeah, in my first,
Did you have siblings, Kevin, that in your
yeah,
family? Yeah.
I did have an older brother.
Okay.
I did have an older brother. His name was Steve, and by the time I was 16, Steve was 18, and he was steeped in the drug trade. He was driving a Jeep, couple of Jeeps. Back then they called them Dodge Raiders.
Yep.
They had just came out. They were like these fancy looking Jeeps, and here
I
my brother
remember.
is 18 years old pulling up in a Dodge Raider. I'm 16, and there was no more working at Little Caesars anymore, because if you worked at Little Caesars or McDonald's,
Yeah.
you might have made in those days $150 at the end of the week.
Yeah.
Where you could go, because by that time we graduated, we weren't working. We learned how to buy our own ounces, or sometimes we would get what you call fronted, ounces. In other words, if I bought two, my connect would front me two. That way I would have more. So I would, in those days, we were paying for like $700 an ounce. And off that $700 ounce, once you wrapped it up, chopped it up, bagged it up, you could make $2,000 off of it. So off of $1,400, you got what we call $4,000 worth of work made. So you're making about a $2,500 profit.
Yeah. A lot different than McDonald's.
In a weekend.
Yeah.
So here it is. I've just made $4,000, whereas my mother is telling me I need to keep my McDonald's job.
Right.
And unfortunately, I just didn't have the wherewithal for that logic to even compute. I know it was logic now, and she knew it was logic because she knew that everything that came along with selling drugs. But as a young kid, you don't even have the faculties to make it make sense. I just made $4,000 in 2 days, and I'm gonna go work at McDonald's and make $125-$130 a week.
Yeah.
So it totally took our mind somewhere else. And now you can be up in school and play the big shot. You can flirt with all the little girls, and of course they like it because they know you have money.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really a ironic lifestyle, and a way to grow up.
And so when you got hit, you were 18, so you would have been like a senior in high school.
Yeah, because I dropped out in my junior year.
Okay.
Yeah, the streets came calling, and you just, unfortunately, you just don't have the foresight to know this is not going to last forever. You need to be putting money up for lawyers. You need to be stashing money, but you made it back so quickly. You might make a couple of $1,000s and go blow it all.
Yeah.
Because you're thinking to yourself, I'm gonna make it back tomorrow.
Yeah.
But
this weekend I'll double it. Yeah.
That's the way kids think, though.
Yep. So when it happens to you when you're around 18 years old, did you have any idea, Kevin, that anything was coming? Did you feel any heat on you, or was it a surprise?
It was cat and mouse. It was cat and mouse, and I got caught because your name is out there ringing down at the police station. You're hearing, the informants are talking about you, and you're seeing, you see some of the most ironic things out, in those days when you're selling crack. I have this image in my mind of, a brother who, he's much older than me, but everybody knows that when he was in high school, he was a track star. He was a speedster. So you might be out there at night selling drugs and the police have some type of sting going on. Now, I just sold the guy the drugs. And the next thing you know, you see this guy shooting down the street like Flash Gordon. And it's almost, what's funny about it, the guys, we're laughing about it because we know that in school he was a track star. And now we're seeing the police trying to chase him. And
Try to catch you.
All that. These are the type of sights and things that you would see in those days. So, it was hot. What we call hot. There was a rap song called "The Block Is Hot." So when you're out there selling drugs and hustling, the block would be hot. The block would be hot. I've been in houses where, we're selling all kind of drugs out the house, and the marked cars would drive by slowly and just shine a big light on the window that you're looking. You just got, duck out the way because it's what we call hot. So
Yeah.
it was
a lot to live with.
Yeah, a lot of cat and mouse, and eventually it was, you were due to get caught, but that's just the way things worked back in those days.
So when you get picked up, is it a knock down the door thing, or is it what? How does it happen?
Well, I was kind of set up, how I got caught. It was really, really stupid because there was a neighborhood guy's, his girlfriend, I was messing with his girlfriend, and he was always really upset about that. We were always going back and forth about it. She was going back and forth about it with him. And one day he just called the police and told them everything. And they waited. And so I ended up having to go and make a delivery because I had other parts of town that I was supplying. So I called a cab. And when the cab came, myself and one of my partners, we came out the house, we got in the cab, and cab took off, and the next thing you know, police got right behind the cab, and I mean, I was loaded down with drugs. Probably had a couple of $1,000 worth of crack. I was finna go drop off to the other place. So when they pulled us over, I stuffed these drugs. I just started stuffing the drugs, and somehow I stuffed them in the seat, but up. And the police took us out the car. And they searched the cab, and they had us sitting in the back seat of the police car. And it took them so long. I really was sitting back in the back seat of the car, hoping and praying they're not gonna find it. They're not gonna find it. They stopped the search a couple of times, started talking to each other, and you know how when things go bad, it's always got to be one more. I'm just gonna search
one more time. Yep.
And when he came out with the bag, my mind just went blank after that.
Oh man. So what happens after that? Like how long of processes you go through, Kevin, with by the time you get hit that night to when you're standing in front of a judge and you're getting 14 years?
Oh man, it was about 6 months.
Yeah.
I went to trial. And I went to trial because I thought I had a good chance of beating it because the cops, to make a long story short, and this is common, you'll get caught with drugs or the gun, you'll get caught with whatever it is. But then what the police will often do is, especially in those days, they would go back and make a story to fit the scenario to justify you to getting caught.
Right.
So if it would have came out in court, actually what happened, we really just stopped him because we didn't have probable cause.
Right.
We didn't have anything. But what they said was, along with getting these tips, the officer made up a story about how he was watching me and my friend on the block selling what we call hand-to-hand combat. Actually selling drugs, making hand-to-hand exchanges with customers. He actually observed us, and that was the reason that he stopped us. But that never happened. The cab pulled up. We came directly out the house.
Yeah.
What he didn't anticipate, there was a lot of witnesses out there.
Yeah.
That saw us come directly out the house. So we had an evidentiary hearing, and the judge had a hard time not throwing it out. But you know how it goes. I'm not going to throw this out, even though I know you're sitting up here lying on these guys. They sent it to trial anyway. So I felt like, because the cops were telling so many lies, that I could beat it.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, was I wrong.
That didn't happen. So, when you got 14 years, did you think you were getting 14 years, Kevin?
No.
Yeah.
No, I thought I might get 5 or 10 because of my record. I was always in the stuff as a kid.
Yeah.
The judges were tired of seeing my face. But no, I absolutely not. Absolutely not. On a nonviolent, drug charge, absolutely not. And in those days, this was the late 80s and early 90s. It was common that, some people had been in shootouts and, ended up catching manslaughter cases. You did 6 or 7 years on a manslaughter.
Right.
And came home.
Yeah.
I think it's much different now. I think now a manslaughter, you probably going to minimally get 10. Mm-hmm. But in those days, you would do 6 or 7.
Oh yeah,
years.
the drug laws were so harsh. Still are harsh, but I mean, back in those days, it was
terrible.
Yeah. What went through your mind though, thinking when she said 14 years? What did you think? What were you?
I thought my life was over.
Yeah.
I was 18 years old. Frankly, for me in those days, 2 weeks was a long time away.
Yeah.
I don't know how kids compute in their mind, but 2 weeks was a long time.
Exactly. Exactly.
We were talking about what we're going to do this weekend and the next couple of days.
Right.
And you're talking about a couple of weeks. So to hear 14 years, to get a 14-year prison sentence.
It's almost as long as you've been alive. At 18 years old, 14 years is half almost.
Yeah. I thought life was over.
Yeah.
I thought it was over. That's the only way I could describe it.
I can't imagine. I mean, at that age, I can't imagine somebody saying, we're taking you away into prison, and you're good. Not just, a couple weeks, not a month, not a year, not 5 years, but 14 years is a long time. I want to talk about how you did your time in prison. Before we do that, I want to recognize the White Collar Support Group. Nightmare Success Podcast is sponsored by the White Collar Support Group. It's the world's first support group devoted to people navigating the white collar justice system. I'm a member of the White Collar Support Group, and I can tell you that this is a bunch of people who help each other through the criminal justice journey for free. Whether you're just starting your journey or you made it through to the other side, this is a great space for you. You can join us on Zoom, Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific. For information, go to prisonist.org. That's prisonist.org. Start here. So, Kevin, they take you walk into his prison. Do you have anything in your mind about strategies or anything about how you're going to live in this new primitive world? Or are you just walking in as an 18-year-old kid hoping nothing crazy happens?
No clue. Definitely walking in, as an 18-year-old kid, just, trying to figure out what's going to be next. I remember, I went to, what they call MTU, Michigan Training Unit. It was known as Gladiator School.
Yeah.
For young
I've heard that. The gladiator
Yeah,
school. Yeah.
Michigan trained, known as gladiator school, because you were gonna earn your stripes. Uh, but I remember when I first got in there, it was this little white kid, and he was in a room, and cell, and I started talking to him through his door, and he was in there for two life sentences.
Wow.
I don't know who he killed. I don't know if it was parents or who it was that he killed. Just a young kid, about 15 years old. Obviously had been waived as an adult,
Yeah.
but I didn't know anything about all that. I just knew that this little young kid was in, and that was one of my first experiences.
Mm.
Then, you know, at that time, the prisons were so crowded that they had all of us, and there was many young people across the state. They just had us all in a big gym
Mm.
with bunks
Yeah.
from end to end, like double bunks from end to end. This is when they were building pole barns. Because I think at
Just to
that
house
time,
people.
Michigan's population exploded to about 52,000 people uh, that were in prison. So that kind of those first months, that kind of made it a little easier because you're in there with kids your age,
Yeah.
and and they got the TV screen up there, and
Mhm.
your MTV Raps is on, and you're just trying to, you know, you're in this reality, but somehow you're trying to forget that this is actually happening by just, taking
An
things.
escape through the TV. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I really think, at least from my experience, that was one of the reasons that rap and hip hop had. We were already like rap and hip hop when we were in society, but to
Sure.
get it, that's all you got.
Yeah.
On new dimensions, just to see, uh, what we thought may have been going on in society. But um, regarding during the time, one of the things that I learned, um, and I think anybody who's done some serious time will probably say this. If you're gonna make it, you literally have to forget about the world. You have to forget about what's happening on the outside, girlfriends, even family. Because if you're not gonna make it, you're not gonna make it. You have to totally just shut down as if that world doesn't exist, and the only world you know is this world, and you have to exist in that world for those years that you're in the world.
That's
If
interesting. Yeah.
your mind is out in society, you're not going to make it. You are not going to make it. You're getting Dear John letters, and oftentimes you see a lot of guys in the early days when they get locked up, they'll be on the phone arguing with girlfriends and going back and forth, and all that's some of the early stage stuff that happened, and it's heart wrenching. I went through it. It's heart wrenching. You know, you're hearing different things about people out there in society, and it's very difficult.
So,
Very.
Kevin, I know one of the things, you're a man of faith, and, you talk about being a nightmare when you were in, but your faith was that faith with you before you went in, or did you find that while you were in prison?
Well, fortunately for me, I had what we call in the church community a praying grandmother.
Yeah.
I had a praying grandmother down in Marianna, Arkansas, and the family coming out of the South was deeply rooted in religion.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't have made it. They were down in the Mississippi Delta, not too many generations away from slavery, sharecropping.
Yeah.
The aspect of God in my life was something different. And my mother would send me and my brother down south um, for the summer. And when we would get down there, it was culture shock.
Oh, I bet.
It was culture shock because in Detroit, no, people don't speak. They're not friendly. But when we would go down south and in Arkansas, folks would speak, folks would wave.
Yeah. Yeah, totally different deal. You know, it's funny that you say that though, Kevin, because I grew up, you know, not in Detroit. I grew up in a little town of Springfield, Missouri. It was Southwest Missouri, kind of close to Arkansas. And but my grandparents, one of them lived in Red Top, which was outside of Buffalo, Missouri, which was like, you know, 3,000 people. But we used to go out down on that farm. You know, parents keep us there a couple of weeks or whatever while they did whatever. And you know, it is funny as a kid, like even from me being in Springfield, that was considered a city kid to the, you know, these farm kids but it's a totally different world, total different way of life. But I think it was good for me as a kid to have that.
It was you know, my time going down to Arkansas for the summers were the richest times of my life. I gained some of the richest experiences of my life, even though they were poor, they didn't have anything. Love and respect, and you know, going to church. Um, I always tell this story sometime about it had to be in the '70s, and first of all, when I went down south, that was the first time I had seen an albino. I'd never seen an albino before. You know, that's somebody that's black, their skin and their hair is blonde. And there was this albino girl, and I can't remember the name, maybe Mo was the name, but it was an old church house. It was kind of like a shack on a dirt road. And people would come, they would be making a beeline to get to that church on Sunday mornings. I was a kid, my grandmother would be walking a few steps up. Me and my brother and my uncles and aunts, we would all be making our way. People would be cutting across the cornfield, down the road. You just saw people making a beeline to that church. And I saw this girl, she was an albino, and she was literally crawling on her elbows and knees, and she kind of had this strange walk, and uh, it was like a spider.
Mm.
Didn't understand then in the '70s that the polio vaccine had not necessarily made it all the way to those backcountry homes and back in the woods and everything. But when I saw her, I was freaked out.
Oh yeah, that would have been kind of scary.
It was the weirdest thing. But what stood out to me more than anything is there must be something about this church.
Uh-huh.
There must be something about this church that people are trying to get here at all costs. Not understanding that was one of the things, the few things that people had. You know, the church, it was the social hour for the community. It
Yeah,
wasn't,
social. Yeah, exactly.
you know, God, religion, and the church, and it had a big impact on me from the time I was growing up, which was turned out to be a great thing. Um, I would even say the greatest thing. So that all while I was going through all these other things, this was instilled in me by my grandmother, even though I didn't see her except for the summers.
Yeah.
Um, but when I would get back to Detroit, you just forget about everything. You just,
Oh yeah.
I mean,
So I get that though, Kevin. So that was in you, and when you got behind the walls, that was something that you carried with you.
it was, but it took a while for it to come out because you're trying to fit in.
Yeah.
You know, for me, my whole neighborhood, being locked up, it turned out to be like summer vacation. Because my whole
Knew a lot of
neighborhood
people there.
was locked up. We were all in there together. We were all kids. We were all still young and silly and fighting guards. And there were so many guys from my neighborhood, 7 Mile. We literally got into it with the Islamic organization, and that was unheard of.
Yeah.
The Moore Science Temple, those guys had power in there.
Oh sure.
But we were so wild and young that it wasn't that they didn't want any smoke, but they were like, leave them guys alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for a while, it was kind of like just unconsciously acting a fool. Um, I went through some tragedy. My mother was killed.
While you were in.
Yeah, while I was like, the most devastating thing to happen to me in my life. And my brother didn't get to go to her funeral. I did get to go to her funeral. I was in state blues and I had an officer escort. It was embarrassing, um, for that to happen.
Yep.
Um, and after that happened in early like '92. I went downhill for about 5 or 6 years. I really went downhill, depression, anger. It was
Bitterness.
that's when I got to the point where I really felt like, I need some help.
Mm-hmm.
I need some help. I need to draw. Um, I need to draw this faith that my grandmother instilled in me. And fortunately, my grandmother would write me every now and then and encourage me. Continue to pray. Go to church, different things like that. And then it was another guy. This was a guy. He was from Jackson, Michigan, because that's one of the towns that we used to go to. A guy named JD. Um, we were our cells were next to each other. And one day I was in my cell, and this guy was next door in his cell, praying and praising the Lord. Now this guy on the street, JD was just a straight clown. He was getting high, but he was one of those guys who was really funny when he got. He still was really cool. Everything was a joke. He wanted his crack, but he still would crack a joke. He just had this jolly spirit. JD was a cool crackhead. We're locked up now, and JD still he's over here praying and praising the Lord and all this stuff. And one day when they broke us from yard, I'm looking at him, and I'm like, I just couldn't. He always had that spirit about himself. I'm like, man, what's wrong with you?
Mm-hmm.
Why? you so
Yeah.
What's
right? Why is this working for you?
If you're in here, he was like, Kev, you need to come to church, man. You need to come on, brother, come to church. And of course, what did I have to lose?
Right.
I had been going through hell.
Yeah.
For 7 years up to that point.
It's a long time.
So I went ahead and went to church with JD, and it was a white pastor. He was there talking about the word. And I remember thinking to myself when I was listening to him, I said to myself, this is what life is supposed to be like. Freedom, a wife, living right, doing good. And here I am sitting up in here with 7 more years to go.
Yeah.
But it touched my heart so deep because I desired, like, man, I'm not even living.
Yeah, you want that. Yeah.
I've been in here since I was 18, and I haven't gotten to experience any of this. And that sounds good to me. I know I was selling drugs, but that doesn't make sense. This sounds good. I think I would like that. And that made such an impression on me that I began, reading my Bible and praying. And man, if you read the word in context, it provides hope. It was my hope. A lot of people, they may have gotten through what they got through or how they got through it, but I probably wouldn't have made it. I would have been the one who would have lost his mind had I not found that hope.
And hope is the biggest. I mean, hope. I remember I had a guy named Romo on the show, and he said, don't ever take away hope from someone because that might be all they have. And that's so true. That one piece could be the thing that makes you survive and get to the next step.
Yeah.
And
because it was saying some good stuff.
Yeah.
It was saying some good stuff. It was talking about how you can be blessed and you can be living a good life. And that idealized life just made more sense to me than anything I had ever thought about before.
So did the mindset change then? That you had 7 years to go. Did you start acting different in that world?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. It was a struggle at first because I remember, I got transferred to a prison camp, a lower level. And I was in my room and I could look down from my room at these guys who were having Bible study under a tree. And I wanted to go there and I wanted to get to that Bible study so bad. I had this big old Bible. And the problem was I had to walk past all my friends.
Yeah. Yeah. Peer pressure.
With those guys who were studying the Bible, I would have had to walk past everybody and they're looking at me with this big Bible and they would have called me out.
Yeah.
Where you going?
Yeah.
Come here, man. You gonna go
Yeah.
over
What
there.
are you doing?
Yeah. So while I was in my room, I was trying to put the Bible on my shirt, under my shirt to see, if I could hide it, how I could play it off. And finally, I just got up the nerve. I just got up the nerve to take the Bible and walk real fast to get
I love it.
that tree, man. And yeah, man, I needed it. And eventually it got to the point where I just stopped caring, what people had to say. I was hurt. I don't know what anybody else was doing, but I was hurt.
That's interesting how that, we talk about this all the time because the show's called Nightmare Success. And they say, well, why did you put those two words together, Brent? And I say, well, it's with us all the time, because if we're trying to get to what we want, we've got to walk through our fears, the things that scare us, our nightmares, to get to that other side. And what you just said really demonstrated that, Kevin. You wanted to get to that tree where those people were, but you didn't want to have that hassle and getting out of your comfort zone of them hassling you. And then you just decided, no, it doesn't matter. I'm going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I want.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do you start doing time like that? How do you start preparing to get out? Because, a lot of guys that I've talked to that, whether they've done, 3, 4, 5 years, that's nothing like doing 10, 12, 14 years. What does it feel like when you start realizing, Kevin, that you've got, you got a year left, you got 6 months left, you've got 3 months left, and you know that you're re-entering society that you've left so long ago? What goes through your mind?
Well, for one thing, for me, I definitely was trying to think ahead and trying to project. I took as many classes as I could. At that time, they had taken out all the Pell Grants. I started in college, but then they snatched them. I think that was under Bush, George Bush the first. Took all the Pell Grants, so we couldn't go to school. So I was trying to educate myself as much as I could. I was going to the law library. I was learning law because I realized that being a paralegal was something that you could do when you got out.
Yeah, which you did, by the way, which we'll get into, which you became very good at that.
Yeah, I realized that lawyers would hire you. Lawyers would hire you to do that work if
you're good. Yep.
So the first thing, I became really skilled at legal writing. My last years in there, I did legal research and legal writing. I got really good at. What I found, and I tell people this all the time, people that's getting ready to come. In your mind, you can picture things about, what you're gonna do, what you want to do, and how you're gonna do it when you get out. But there is nothing in that you can do in prison. Nothing you can, from my experience, nothing you can do in prison that will prepare you for getting out. You can try to prepare yourself. You can hype yourself up. You can idealize things, and you can do all that. And it can be some good plans.
Yeah.
And you can even have people that's there for you and that's going to help you. But for me, the first day out was like meeting Mike Tyson, day one.
Right between the eyes.
an entire different reality. That first period of the first year or two, it's sink or swim.
What was it like for you getting out after, that amount of time? What was that? What re-entering the world? Because there would have been a lot of things that changed. Because
Yeah.
it's hard. I was in for 3 years and a lot of things had changed. That's nothing like what you re-enter. And what did you re-enter the world into, Kevin? Who'd you live with and where did you go?
Um, this is where you start talking about the blessing of God, because um my wife today, um, I would call her my girlfriend while I was doing that time, but she would say, Negro, please. I'm just a friend here for you to help you. But there's no way I'm waiting on you another 7 years.
Yeah.
So, fortunately, her name is Tracy. She's a bank manager. Um, Good girl, good girl who, I was dating, and she did remain a friend all those years. And fortunately, nobody had got her. And I think that there were a couple proposals that she got, but she did have a lot of love for me. I just think she didn't want to admit it. So, man, she's been my savior, my rock. Um, I would have had to go to a homeless shelter had she not been there.
Yeah, no, I feel what you're saying, because the guys that don't have any support, that is what happens. And
Yeah,
it's a life changer if you have somebody that, and when I was reading your profile, Kevin, I thought the analogy of it takes a village, to raise a kid, but it really does take a village to help somebody that's been justice impacted, been in prison, to get them into the proper reentry, to have opportunities, to keep the hope alive, to
yeah,
make the next step, because there's all kinds of obstacles, and no matter what. And this goes into 300 prisons, so I never want to sugarcoat anything. Getting out is not easy. One of the things that we, being the guys that have done this, need to tell those guys is, even though it's not easy, you're always going to live with the tattoo, scarlet letter on your head that you're an ex-felon.
right.
What you've got to learn to do is how do you carry that, and how you tell your story, so that that is part of you, but you own it. They don't own it. And that's what I think is really inspiring about your story is each and every step that you took as you went out, you got hit, and it wasn't easy, but you kept gathering around you people that were the right people that helped you. And then you started doing some really incredible things. To talk about your paralegal deal, how you got into that.
Yeah. So, again, I was trying to figure out something. I didn't know what my life was going to look like. I remember a devastating conversation I had with a cousin one day. I called, it was during the holiday, and our family was there. Our family was there at their house from out of town, out of state, Arkansas, Texas, Georgia. And my cousin answered the phone, and he said to me, he said, he said, uh, Kev, you're gonna have to call back. Um, we have family that's here at the house. And when he said that, it hurt me so bad. It hit me. It hit me where it hurt because the way he said it was like I wasn't included in the family.
A part of the family. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not that, hey, Uncle so and so is here. You want to holler at him real quick, or
Yeah.
you know, like we got family here at the house, so you're gonna have to call back. And I was devastated. You know what I mean? So again, for me, I was trying to figure out. I didn't know where my life was gonna land, where I was gonna be, but I had two things on my mind. I said, I'm gonna be in somebody's church, and I'm gonna be working in somebody's law office. I said if I could accomplish those two things, I know I'll be okay. I don't know how it's gonna look.
Yep.
I don't know where I'll be, but I know it won't be somewhere in the streets committing crimes, putting myself at risk. So those are two things, two bottom lines that I had in my mind. I'm gonna be doing some paralegal work, and I'm gonna be in church. Because I needed to assure myself that I wasn't gonna mess up no matter what. So when I got home again, by that time everything was computerized. Uh, I often tell the story about how when people were putting these cell phones up to their, and I thought somebody was getting ready to say, "Hey, Scotty, beam me up." You know, I was looking like, this is a phone. Technology had changed, everything had changed, and I realized that even the paralegal skills that I had were no good because it was all about computerized legal research. Um, so at some point, after about a year and a half, my wife enrolled me into a place called Academy of Court Reporting, where they had court reporting classes, paralegal classes, and I think PI classes. And I went ahead, I took that course. It was a 2-year associate's degree in paralegal studies. Um, Learned all about how to research on, online and through the computer. And once I already had the skill set, legal research, but once I got the computer skills, um, I immediately started working for different attorneys around the city. And when you find what I found is when I worked for different law offices, I just made myself invaluable. I worked so hard, getting
Yeah.
briefs
Outworked
together,
everybody else. Yep.
together. When a lawyer goes to court and you hand them the file and everything's in there, they love that.
Yeah,
They
you're a
love.
hero.
So I made myself invaluable, and that was the big break for me. Even though it was kind of hard. I worked for a couple of attorneys. One was a lady. Um, she was pretty rough. She was pretty rough. I don't want to get into demeaning her, what her personal life might have been like, but it was like you can't have a husband. So you come here and you kick the dog. I'm the dog. But I think she was wondering why I had not quit.
Mm-hmm.
Why am I so tough on him and he hasn't quit? And because I don't think anybody ever worked for the past 3 months.
Mm.
And I hung in there and I ended up working for her for 6 years. I became invaluable to her.
Wow.
But what she didn't know, I did not want to go back to the streets. It was my chance. It was my chance.
And I think that's one of the things that, and Tony Gant talks about this too, that people don't know how desperate a person who's been in is looking for a real opportunity and how much harder they'll work. A lot of that has to be educated to the employer that these people, so many are nonviolent, and they're just desperately trying to get back into society. If you just give them a shot,
Absolutely.
they'll work around everybody because they want it so bad. And that's what you did, Kevin. That's what happened.
That is an absolute fact. Yeah, that's true.
So it advances. You go through years of the paralegal thing, but then you get into other work. You get into the ministry, start working with the youth kids and giving them your story and how you do, and try to keep them out of doing what you did. How did that happen for you? Did you, because you only have so many hours in the day. So what was going through your mind as you were transitioning back and forth and going and growing into all that?
Yeah, for me, I was just really committed, to reaching out to youth. I was committed to making sure that I could contribute to the bills and to my life at home. I definitely, the work ethic that I have and it was unmatched. unmatched. I always say people might have been smarter than me. They may have had more connects than me. They may have had a lot more than, but nobody will ever outwork me.
Yeah,
Never.
and the other thing is, Kevin, you're a great networker. You know,
Yeah.
each one of these stages also got you into other stages. I mean, looking at your story, your networking got you into politics, and then the politics, then it brought you back through, and now you're a pastor. But it's interesting how each and every time you stepped, you were connecting, and then you connected other people to opportunities. You know, the Tony Gant that we've talked about, when he came out, because you knew him on the streets, and he came out after doing 20 years, you connected him because you were in the Capitol and you had opportunities, and you were reaching out and connecting people to things that maybe you had a tougher time to walk through at that moment, but you knew how important it was to give somebody an opportunity, which all of that is important.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It absolutely is. I was, the lady that I was working with, her name was Leslie Love. She was running for office. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard. If you don't have a family name or some type of legacy, it's really hard to break into politics in Detroit. It's really hard. But she kept running, but she was falling what I call up the step. And I recognized that there was something brilliant about her. So every time she ran, I was right there helping her. And eventually, the last time she ran, she won. She won. She won, and she took me to Lansing with her as her chief of staff, and we really learned the ropes together. But she was not easy to work for though. She made me learn what I needed to learn. But Leslie Love, former state rep, I was her chief of staff for 5 years, and then the last year I was with LaTonya Garrett. But
did you ever have like imposter syndrome, Kevin? I mean, a lot of people talk about that I'm doing this, I'm getting this opportunity, I'm now I'm chief of staff in this world. Am I supposed to be here? Because I mean, you stepped out of so many things in your journey through life that where you are now is pretty remarkable. And even if you have imposter syndrome, you got to deal with it and say, yeah, I'm supposed to be here. I earned it.
Well, for me, it was a little different because, I really dealt with it from a spiritual standpoint. And from the spiritual standpoint, you learn that if you do right, if you trust God, if you work hard, He's going to bless you. He's going to open doors for you. What I did have to grapple with was, what is the purpose of all this happening to me? What am I supposed to be doing?
Right.
And I remember my early days, going into the rep's office, and there's this big, huge picture window. And when you look out that window, you're looking at the Capitol, and you're looking at the architecture of the Supreme Court and the legislative offices and all this stuff around. And the only way I could describe it, the Ten Commandments. If you ever saw the Ten Commandments, where they were building up, the Hebrews were building the city, and Moses was looking out over the city. I felt like Moses. I felt like, God, what are you telling me? Like, so from that aspect, I was like, I'm not one of these folks. I'm the people that's out there.
Right.
And I'm sitting here looking at the Supreme Court and what does this mean? So I always had a sense of
there was a purpose.
Yeah, I had the sense that at some point I'm gonna have to leave here, and I'm gonna have to come back with the message, let my people go. I didn't know how it would happen. I didn't know if she would fire me. I didn't know if I was gonna leave and come back as a rep one day.
Yeah.
I didn't know if I was gonna leave and come back as an activist one day.
Yeah.
But it turned out it was more leverage my position as chief of staff with my activism And the let my people go portion was the expansion of the expungement laws and the raise the age laws and all the criminal justice laws and reforms that we did push. That was kind of my let my people go.
Which is huge. Like Kevin, like what we were talking about earlier before we got on, Michigan is such a leader in policy change in the country for doing things to help the second chance justice impacted community to have an opportunity, to have a place to live, to have a place to get a job, because you're actually changing statutes and laws for that to happen. And it's people like you that are at the table that actually have walked the walk. And to me, that's where change happens, is where you actually can listen to somebody that knows it, because that's where they came from. They've experienced it. And they know the reasons and the solutions, what could happen. And that's if we could get more of that happening, that's where I think that's where change happens.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I have been steeped in the major movements here. It's kind of been on the unsung level. I've set everybody else up, but
well, it's kind of like your work with Nation Outside, getting that set up and rolling, and then you rolled into something else.
Absolutely.
And Nation Outside is all justice impacted people too. If anybody wants to look up that organization, it's a great organization that does incredible things, but all run and done through justice impacted community, which is and Kevin was a very big part of the startup of that, and he got it rolling. And then as he got it rolling, he moved into, and I'm trying to remember the time period that you took over as pastor of the church, because that's been what, 7 years?
Yeah, it was all about the same time. It ran kind of in conjunction.
Okay.
It ran in kind of conjunction.
Tell us about your world with that.
Yeah. It's been another challenging aspect, because, when you talk about the Baptist church, the Black Baptist church, the church has always been the center of movement and action in the Black community and civil rights and, standing up for justice and standing up for our people. But when it came to justice reform, they were really late to the ball game, and really slow. That's why you have so many activists out here, Black Lives Matter and all these organizations who they're a whole separate movement from the church.
Right.
So when I came to the church, when I was elected as the church, it was really, really difficult, because I am much more Malcolm than Martin. And the church and the elders, they struggle with that. And here I am, and they were like, "Oh God, here come another. He's ready to talk about this prison stuff again." And can we stop hearing? Can we just hear about Jesus and not hear about this reform stuff? And I'm trying to tell them, why you want to hear about Jesus, your husband is in prison, your son is in prison, your nephews are in prison, your daughter's in prison, your everybody's on probation.
Right. Yeah. Dealing with the trauma.
It took a while for me to get our elders to understand this, because what had happened was that the system had made them ashamed of us.
Right.
And because all they understood is, well, if you would have just followed what the Bible said, you wouldn't be in this position. But Grandma, you don't understand that they put guns and drugs and crack, and they put all this in our community. The choices we had to choose from, you didn't have to choose from those choices. So it's taken me a while to get that message across, but I've hung in there. I've made it to 7 years. And now that they've seen all the things that's transpired over the last 7 years, the laws that have changed, the reform that has happened, millions of lives that have been impacted, now they kind of get it. And they're like, wow, our pastor is a prophet. So, but it it was rough. It was rough, and it's still some challenges. But they have a much better understanding that I like I said, I'm a lot more Malcolm than Martin.
Well, and you're a man of challenges. That's the great thing. A lot of people, when they see a challenge, they see it as a barrier. And you're one of those guys, Kevin, that all through your life, you have continued to knock them down instead of seeing it as a stop. And that's a big deal because I think if you continue on and do what you're doing, it's a big deal. It changes things. The impact is something, not just one person. It changes a lot of things. And it's encouraging. It's encouraging to see people that really dedicate themselves to that because it takes a lot of effort. It's not easy. And what you're doing is not easy, but it's impactful.
Yes. I appreciate that. There's a lot of great things that's happened because of this work, and we're not done.
No, gosh, work's never done.
So much more to do.
I've got to ask you this, Kevin, because I always ask people this, because we've covered the gambit here of your life. Mm-hmm. What do you think is your biggest takeaway through all this that you've been through for the listeners out there?
For me, my biggest takeaway is you got, and I've got to go spiritual on this. You've got to find out your purpose. Like, God had a purpose for Moses. He had a purpose for Joseph, Abraham, David. You've got to find out that's the biggest thing. And when you find that, then you can really make headway what you're doing. I remember when I was first doing trainings about activism and different things like that, because when in those early days of coming home, or even before you came home, people would say, well, what are you going to do? Somebody said, well, I'm going to start a nonprofit organization, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. And you have no clue what it's really going to take to do that. You just think in your mind, because this is what you see people when you hear about people doing. But what I learned, and I didn't understand it at first, they said, whatever you do, you have to follow your passion. Do what you're passionate about. And I didn't understand why they were saying that, because I just want to start a nonprofit. And I'm trying to start a nonprofit in things I'm not passionate about.
Right.
Then what I find out is, because I'm not passionate about it, this is taking too long. This is too hard. Where's the money? I can't do it. You throw the towel in. But when you're passionate about it, you're just going to...
You'll put in the extra work.
You're just going to... And that's what it was. I was passionate about. So all the foundational work for Nation Outside and, some of the other groups that I've worked with, there was no money in those early days. But because of the passion kept us doing it. And now there's millions of dollars coming into different organizations because we were passionate about what we were doing.
I love that.
No money. That's what I was saying.
That's a huge takeaway too. Have your passion, find your why, because that's the thing that's going to keep you rolling. And through your story, Kevin, it keeps you outworking everybody because you know why you're doing it. And that's a great message for anybody who's listening. Speaking of people listening out there, I want to give a shout out to Homestead Financial, who lets me use this podcast room with this fancy equipment. If anybody's got home mortgage needs, go to Greg Aftiev. He's your guy. If anybody needs a book out there, Nightmare Success, it's on Amazon. I wrote that one. It's on Barnes & Noble too.
Look forward to that.
Don't forget, if you got time, the reviews on Apple, those things put the show on steroids. And if you need anything to know about me, it's BrentCassidy.com. That's with a TY, not a DY. I spell it wrong. And as I used to say when I was writing my emails back and forth, stay strong. I'll do the same. Kevin Harris, thank you so much for being on today. You have you're an inspiring guy, and I know people got a lot out of this, so I appreciate it.
Oh man, I thank you for the opportunity. when you're the guy that's doing all the work behind the scenes, it's good to come out and get a little bit of recognition and attention. So
Absolutely. Why not? All right, folks. Nightmare Success, in and out.